We are at the First Presbyterian Church in Wabash, Indiana, on the corner of Miami and Hill Street. We are interviewing Raymond Martin today. I'm Ashley Lichtenbarger. The camerawoman is Megan Frick, and we're working for the Wabash County Historical Museum. Raymond, what branch of the military were you in?
I was in the United States Navy.
Okay, and in what war did you serve?
Korean War and after.
Okay, what years were you in the service?
I enlisted on April the 15th, 1952, and I was released from active service on April the 13th, 1956.
Okay, and what was the highest rank that you achieved?
My highest rank I achieved as an enlisted man was quartermaster 3rd class.
Okay, and where did you serve most of your service?
Korea.
Okay. Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Okay. Where were you living at the time?
In Wabash.
All right. Why did you choose the branch of the Navy that you chose?
Basically because I had read a lot of brochures and I had was getting ready to be drafted into the Army, and I decided that it wasn't for me to pick up a gun and shoot at people. So after a lot of investigation, I decided that the United States Navy was the best branch that I could possibly serve my country in.
Okay. Do you recall the first days of service for you?
Oh yes. My first days after my enlistment, I enlisted over at Marion, Indiana, and then we went to Indianapolis, Indiana for our physicals. And after you was passed, you called home and said goodbye to your family, and then we caught a troop train. I said troop train for San Diego. This train took us 5 days to get there because it had to stop at all the sidings and let the main passenger trains get through and everything, and then it stopped at seemed like every little town along the way to San Diego. But I arrived in San Diego on about the 20th of April. The Navy people were there. They separated the guys that were going into the Marine Corps because the Marine Corps Training Center was right next to the Naval Training Center in San Diego. They divided us into 2 groups. We started taking orders, getting in line and all this stuff. Then we went to the Naval Training Center where we were assigned billet numbers and put in companies. Took off our civilian clothes. They provided us with a suitcase. We sent them home because they said we wouldn't need them again for 4 years anyway. And then we started our boot camp training, which was a 12-week training in San Diego.
Okay. Do you remember your instructors for boot camp?
My boot camp, it was chief. It was a chief, and I was just thinking about it. Chief Stewart was his name, and he was recalled to active duty from World War II into the Korean War, and he was my drill instructor, like the main sergeant, you might say. His chief was as high as you could go at that time in the Navy, as an enlisted man.
Okay. Did you like him as your instructor? Did you think he was too harsh, or was he nice?
As long as you, when you went in the service, you always had the right way and the wrong way that you were brought up to do. But when you service, you forgot about the right way and the wrong way, and you did things the Navy way. And I learned that the very first day. So as long as I obeyed orders and did things the way that the Navy wanted me to do it, I had no problem with my drill instructor.
Okay. All right, we'll move into the war experience. Where exactly did you go?
We left, my first cruise was we left San Diego in November of '52. We went to Hawaii, and when you go to Hawaii, you got to go through what they call an operational readiness inspection. That's where you go through with warlike combat. You fire your guns, and you go through combat like general quarters. General quarters is battle stations aboard the aircraft carrier. We had 3,000 men aboard the aircraft carrier, counting the air group, and of course when they saw a general quarters, it was running all over the place. And after we were past our ORI inspection in Hawaii, we then proceeded to Yokosuka, Japan, and where we arrived in January. We took on supplies, and my first experience then was we left Japan at around the last of January of 1953, and we went to the Korean coast where we operated for 45 consecutive days. During those 45 days, we'd have ships come alongside to replenish the food and stuff on the carrier. And then we would launch our aircraft starting at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning for combat sorties over Korea. They would be recoveries to get, and I think during the Korean War at that time, for the time we was there, we launched more than 6,000 sorties against the North Koreans. One of my biggest experiences in there, that there was some North Korean airplanes, a squadron of them, come out over the fleet when we were refueling, taking on fuel from a tanker, and of course we got general quarters called, and we didn't even worry about spreading the line from the oil line coming over. We just pulled away, broke the line from the tankers to get away in case they bombed the tanker. General quarters sounded, and then we were on general quarters from about 2 o'clock in the morning until 10 o'clock, or 10 o'clock that morning, from 2 to 10, about 8 hours. The planes were kept circling. We launched aircraft. They went after these people, and they finally left. And I remember one of my buddies from North Carolina telling me that, Martin, if they come down and bomb this ship, and we have to abandon ship, I'm going to tie a rope around you. And I said, well, why are you going to tie a rope around me? And he says, they called me Marty, and he said, well, Marty, if anyone on this ship is going to get off, if this thing's going to sink, it's going to be you, so I want to be sure I'm tied with you. And I always thought that was pretty humorous that he told me that. His name was Gene Hodges, and he was in my division. We had 3 divisions in the Navy. I was assigned as in the navigation department. That's what quartermasters were in the Navy, navigation. And our duties was to be a helmsman, steer the ship. We had engine order telegraph operators, which the officer of the day would give the orders for speed, and we would have to signal our little indicators what he wanted, so get down to the engine rooms, and then they would know what to do. The helmsman would change courses and whatever the officer of the day instructed us to do. And then we would have chart house watches. Those were usually for your non-commissioned officers, such as quartermaster 3rd class on up, which eventually I got to work in the chart house. We had to keep the logbook, keep track of the launches and landings, the pilots, if there was a pilot that was missing. And by the way, I think during the Korean War, the Phil Sea had a total of 13 servicemen that did not return, that paid the ultimate sacrifice. And when one of these pilots would go down, we had to go get the information of the pilot and put it in our logbook, because really the logbook was the history of the Phil Sea. And we had to get his name, his rank, and where he was lost, the approximate area, and we'd have to get this from Air Ops. And when I was on duty, I think I had 3 times I had to muster in the pilots in the logbook who did not return with their squadrons. And that was very, very hard for a 21, 22-year-old kid to do. But after I got out of that, I got my rank, and then I got in the chart house, which as a quartermaster 3rd class, our duties were to perform navigational ranges, like long-range navigation. That was known as LORAN in the Navy. And this was the beginning of the electronic ages coming into, for computers. Only then it was a lot of hand rather than all computer now. I had to go to school for that for 2 months, and as advanced training in San Diego. And then the other duties at chart house was just keeping course, changing the dead reckoning tracer and things like that. But getting back to the Korean War, after that night of the planes flying overhead, we went back to Yokosuka, where I think we returned, if I remember right, twice. After 45 days, we returned for rest and recreation and liberty in Yokosuka. And I had the pleasure of, when I was in Japan, going to see the Buddha and going to Tokyo and other places other than just Yokosuka. And I always like to take tours, to take advantage when I was there, because it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Then we would leave Yokosuka after about 20 days. We would go back out to sea for another 35 to 45 days off of Korea. Then we would go back to Yokosuka for another R&R and Liberty, which is always looked forward to after you've been at sea for 35 to 45 days. You had a lot of fun using 3 sections. You had section one day you'd have duty, the next 2 days you'd have Liberty. And what I liked about the navigation department, we had what they called a watch standards Liberty. After we stood our watches and you had no other assignments for that duty that day, you were free to go ashore, as even though your section had duty. But you were expected to be there and do your duty. And so that's what they called watch standards Liberty. And also another good item about being in the navigation department, when you had chow call, we had early chow. We had the early chow cards that got us down so we could get fed before the regular ships come in. And when you're trying to feed 2,500 enlisted men, that's quite a line down there. So we got early chow call, and we were right in and out before they even had the regular chow call. So that was another advantage of being in the navigation department. And then we went back to Korea in June to make our 3rd trip to the Korean coast waters. And during this time, the talks of the truce was coming pretty heavily. The morning of July the 28th, 1953, we launched, in about 5 o'clock in the morning, we launched the last groups of aircraft to fly over North Korea, in the Phil Sea did, in a combat operation. They were gone for approximately 3 hours, and when they returned and were landed, we got word that the truce had been signed, and so our planes flew the last combat sortie from the Phil Sea over the Korean water, North Korean shore. Then we were detached to the United States, the first ship to leave the Pacific Fleet. And by the way, I forgot to mention that that was the 7th Fleet. The Pacific Fleet was known as the 7th Fleet. And we had an aircraft carrier coming from the States to relieve us, and so we were detached. We went to Yokosuka, went to Hawaii, and thank God we were back in the United States in September. It takes approximately, we left July the 28th, and I think we arrived back in San Diego, California on September the 1st. No, wait a minute, it was in August, the latter part of August. I think it was August the 24th, 25th, somewhere like that, we landed. And then I come home and leave for 30 days in September. Thank God. That basically was my experience in the Korean War. Like I said, we lost 13 able-bodied Americans. The ship paid its dues. We launched over, like I said earlier, 6,000 to 7,000 flights or launches over to the Korean land. And the Phil Sea was known as the showboat of the Pacific Fleet, because it seemed like every time that we would go to combat area, we would become what they known as the headquarters for the admiral, and he would come aboard and go into the flag plot, and that was where he would stay while he's aboard ship. And they kept moving these admirals around, but he always seemed to stay on the Phil Sea the longest. So word got out that we was a showboat of the 7th Fleet instead because of the length of time the admirals would stay aboard. My captain of the ship during the Korean War, I served under 4 different captains, but the captain of the ship during the Korean War was Captain Paul Ramsey, who was one heck of a nice captain. The people loved him. We got him. He always talked about his hunting and fishing, and when he was relieved for duty, they spent 1 year as captains aboard aircraft carriers. And by the way, these captains were all former pilots, and they were all World War II fighter pilots, and with the Navy. And Captain Paul was probably the best liked captain of ones I had. And in my naval experience, after we went on leave and the Korean War was over, then I made 2 more cruises across the wide Pacific, and each time we going and coming, we had to stop in the beautiful land of Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. I had the pleasure of we would dock right behind the USS Arizona, and this was before the war memorial, the memorial over the Arizona was built. And knowing my father would be interested in that. Our flight deck was about 75 feet above the water line, our flight deck. And I walked to the end of the flight deck with my camera, and I took a picture of the Arizona looking down on it, and you could still see the stack. And at that time, you could see the oil still flowing from the Arizona, and knowing that there was 12, 13, 1,400 sailors down below there, it gave you a feeling. So I took that picture and sent it back to my father. And when my father passed away, my mother made sure I got that picture back, which I have at home, my photo album now. So I thought that was a great thing my dad was really interested in. And there was still a lot of battle scars of the World War II, Hawaii in 1953, 54. There was still a lot of around there. Some of the ships hadn't even been cleared out. The Oklahoma was still laying on its side of Fort Island. They hadn't cleared that out yet. And the Arizona, and I think there was the California, some residents of the battleship California was still right in there. But it was great. Is there any other thing you want to know?
Mostly my other questions have to do with aspects of living during the war, such as how did you keep in touch with your family?
Oh, yeah. We were instructed in boot camp. We had to send a letter at least every other day, write a letter every other day to our parents. And being the Navy way, I continued to do that during my Navy career. When I would have a watch during the Korean War, we had various stations that were assigned to, and one of the best places we had was in after steering, and that was clear down at the bottom of the ship where the engines were that run the propellers and turn the rudders. They called it after steering, and you had to have a quartermaster down there in case something on the bridge happened, that the quartermaster could take control and the after steering and keep the ship under control. Well, you just put your earphones on and you would just sit there. And so to make the 4 hours, you stood a 4-hour watch in the Navy. Everything was by 4 hours, starting at midnight to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 12, etc. And to make the time go faster, I would sit back and I would write my mother and father, grandparents, sisters, brothers letters. And that's the way I commuted home. Blessed my mother, she contacted me and she'd always send me pictures of articles that was in the Wabash Plain Dealer. But that's basically how we communicated.
Okay. And what about, did you have plenty of supplies on ship?
Yes. You see, when we operated in the waters, we had destroyers escorting us because we had to have point guards around the carrier, which is a valuable piece of equipment. It was 30,000 tons. You had 3,000 men on there, and you had 4 squadrons of aircraft, so they wanted to make sure that those were pretty well protected. So we usually had a cruiser and 4 destroyers in the squadron. And since the Phil Sea carried abundance of fuel, jet fuel was in one section ship, and then we had diesel oil for our engines. Well, a destroyer could only carry so much, so many times they would come alongside and we would give them some of our fuel until we started running low, and then that's when they'd bring the supply ships aboard. And then when they brought the supply ships aboard, we got fresh milk again, thank God, instead of powdered milk. We had new supply of eggs brought in. We had a new supply of meat brought in. And that's the way the Navy worked. They bring these supply ships out from the coast. When you was out for 35 to 45 days, they'd bring these ships out, resupply you, shoot with lines coming across. And then if you had anyone transferring, they transfer over to supply ships so you get back in. But being on a carrier, if you got transferred, a lot of times they just flew you off the plane, and another plane would come in, land on the flight deck, and then take you off. But that's the way we got our food and got our supplies, and supplied the other ships that were around us in our destroyer division group.
You talked about traveling a lot when you got leave or R&R.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us some of the places that you went?
Yes, I can. Number one, we went to the Philippines, Manila. I took a trip out to Corregidor, where they had the famous last stand of General MacArthur. Left Corregidor during World War II and said, "I shall return," which he did. I saw the caves back there where the men stayed. I went into Old Town Manila, where all the battle scars were still there from the Japanese fight. I went out, took a tour out to the Bataan Death March in the Philippines, and where the Japanese, when they first took control of the Philippines in the Second World War, there was so many Americans there, and many Americans failed to survive that. When I returned home, I did meet one guy, a former Army personnel. His name was, we call him Sarge Parrott. He ran a nursing home on Hill Street, and Sarge was in that death march, and we had a nice discussion on that, since I was Korean. He was 7 years before me in World War II. And then we got to visit Okinawa, and I went, took a tour of the battle that they had during Okinawa, from the landings of the ships, or not the ships, but the landing of the fighting men, beachhead. And then they took us away. They went clear across the Hawaiian, or the Okinawan battlefields. We got to see the Cave of the Virgins, they called it, because the Japanese had put these young children down there in this cave, these Okinawans, and then they sent just a bunch of troops down there. A few members of the troops went down there, and they was firing guns out there, and so our men come up, and they didn't know these children were in there, and they used flamethrowers to get these Japanese out there. Well, when they got them out, got everything cleared out, they went down and found all these young children that had also been burned up, so they call it the Cave of the Virgins. And then we followed that all the way through to where the Japanese committed hara-kiri by jumping off the edge of the cliffs because they didn't want to surrender to the American forces. That was my yes. And then when I was in Okinawa, there was a Navy Air Force base, Kadena Air Force Base, and a childhood friend of mine, Robert Snavely, was in the Air Force. And how small the world is, I went over and talked to Bob, and we spent a few hours together talking about old times in Wabash, Indiana. And that just shows you how small the world is. I knew that he was at the base, and Bob has since passed away. Then I was in Hong Kong with Tiger Bomb and all of them. And at that time, it was still a British Crown colony in Hong Kong. And just a note of interest, when we were in Hong Kong, two of my buddies I run around with, and his name was Keith Grandin, and the other was Charles Cole. Cole was from South Carolina, and Grandin was from Missouri. They were very good buddies of mine. And we decided to go to a movie. And the movie that was on was, I just saw it the other day on TV, was The River of No Return with Bob Mitchum and Marilyn Monroe, and in Technicolor. And that's where I first saw that movie was in the theater in Hong Kong. Another fabulous thing about Hong Kong was that I went to a tailor shop, and I had gotten married in 1954. My wife came home with me. She was living in California. And I took his picture in, and the guy said, "Give me your wife's sizes." And so I told her her sizes she was. He made her little jacket, and I mailed that to my wife. And she wrote me a letter back and said that fit her to a perfect T. Said she couldn't have had it been tailored any better than what that. And he did this with just a picture I gave, and then with the measurements I gave. So they were very good tailors there in Hong Kong, which they're known for their clothing anyway, cashmere and things like that. And let's see. Then I got to visit Nagasaki, Japan, where the A-bomb was dropped. I went to Ground Zero, where the bomb blast was supposed to occur, and a lot of destruction there. Yeah, a lot of destruction. It's until you go visit a place like that, you just don't know what these bombs can do. That's the reason today I'm so fearful of atomic nuclear bombs. And we went into Kobe, Japan, and my three buddies, or two buddies, the ones I just talked about, Cole and Rana, we decided to just go up and get away from just go up in little villages down there, and we ended up, no one could even speak English. And so everything we did was with hands. If we wanted something to eat, we'd have to go like this to let them know if that's what we wanted to eat. And but they were very friendly to us, and we stayed there. We hated to leave, but we finally found our way back to the ship. Told the guys about it. They called us crazy and nuts, but we really enjoyed it. And let's see, where else did I go? Hong Kong, Philippines. And then during my second cruise, there was a Cathay Airlines that had been shot down by. Then it was Vietnam. We were off the coast of Vietnam. It was called Indochina then. It was from the French had that for a long time, French Indochina, but it was Indochina, and some Chinese planes had come out, and this Cathay Airlines had went down. I don't think it was shot down, but so they sent our ships out to look for survivors from this aircraft. And while our planes were out searching for survivors, there was two communist fighter jets that came from Indochina and attacked our planes that were doing the searching work, and they were ordered then, if fired upon, to fire back, which these communist planes fired upon our pilots, and we fired back and shot them both down. We thought maybe that might be a confirmation at that time, that the communists there, the tensions were kind of strong anyway at that time between China and the United States over Formosa. But that was the most action I saw during my second cruise overseas. And but that was about the main ports of interest that I got to see when I was in the Navy. It was basically Far East, and I really enjoyed all the customs, the way the people lived then. And in Hong Kong, a lot of people lived on these little boats, and it was nothing to wake up in the morning and see a little baby floating dead in the bay. I think when they had a child, they didn't want it; they just threw it overboard. Or you'd walk down the streets of Hong Kong, and people were laying there, no money, no work. They were homeless, you might say, as we call homeless today. And their sewage would run right underneath the sidewalk, and a lot of times it would smell, and it just made you glad that you were from the United States, I'll tell you that.
Have you ever traveled outside Indiana before?
The furthest I traveled outside of Indiana before I entered the Navy was baseball games in Chicago, Cubs and White Sox, with my father. and we took a trip to Wisconsin once, and that was about the furthest I was out of Indiana until the Navy.
What an adjustment. Okay. Do you recall any particularly funny things that happened?
Oh, yeah, I might say it was humorous to us. Like I said, my wife and I was living in California, and my buddies would bring my wife, or they would want to know if they could come over and have a steak supper or something. If they'd bought the steaks, if my wife's name was Ruth, they'd say, would Ruthie fix the steaks and everything? I said, sure, bring them over. So they would bring them over, and they would bring, of course, their beer and their booze and stuff with them. And I would rather have them drink there than out in the bars and getting in their cars and running all over California, because it was so dangerous. And I told them, though, I said, you guys come over and party at my house. You had to stay here. You couldn't leave. So they agreed to that. And the funny part, we get up the next morning, and we couldn't even find a place to walk through the living room because there was bodies just laid all over, strung all over the couches and stuff. But they were so honest and grateful that they had a place to call something like home, that they stayed there all night. But we thought that was pretty nice of the guys, and pretty humorous for them to do that.
Did you play pranks on one another or pull jokes or anything?
Oh yeah, we would. Brandon, like the kid I mentioned from Missouri, we were always partners and playing cards. Basically, that's the way you pass time in the Navy. You play cribbage, because after your 4-hour watch, you had, and the time you slept for 8 hours, you had 12 hours of free time after your cleaning stations was up. So you played a lot of cribbage, card game. You played a lot of pinochle. You played a lot of hearts. You played a lot of poker, which I was never a good poker player, so I never got involved in that too much. There's too many experts on that thing. I found that out quick. Just watching. And a game I never played before was pinochle, and I learned to play pinochle just watching. But Brandon and I were partners, basically in hearts, and we would never like to lose. So I guess some people would call it cheating. We call it pranks. When you hold your cards, and he would hold up. If he said, if you made your suit, if you had one of the heart, he'd go one. He'd hold one card up on the card, and then if you wanted another suit, he'd hold the card with 2 fingers. You want another, he'd hold them with 3 fingers. Another suit, he'd hold them with 4 fingers. And so we always knew back and forth which suit to call when it would pass and come back around. And I said, well, he wants hearts, so I'd make it hearts before it got back to him, because the next guy might make it in a suit we didn't have one. Then there was another time that we were supposed to make your bunks up in the morning, clean them, and there were times when guys would come up in your thing and you'd get ready for inspection, and they would take your, basically all you had in the Navy was just your bunk, and you just had a blanket over it, but you had to have that blanket folded a certain way. And so just before inspection, they had a habit of going around to some guys, just picking on anyone, the first guy they could find, and taking their blanket and shaking it all out. And about the time the inspection was going on, you'd run up to your compartment because you had to, and there was your blanket all. So you had about 2 minutes to get that thing all folded, get it all tucked back down again. But we never squealed on one another who did it. We just sat back and I had it pulled on me a couple times, and it was just a lot of fun. And that was just one of the pranks that they pull. They had all sorts of pranks they could do. And one of them was inspection. We had a pair of shoes you'd wear just strictly for inspection. And we'd go on watch and stuff, like down in secondary Conroe, I told you, down at the bottom of the ship. Well, you take your shoes down, your inspection shoes, and you'd sit there that whole time and just spit shine them. By spit shine, you put a little polish on it, and you just kind of spit on it and take that, rub it in, and take that old cloth and really get those things out. And then you put them back in the sock, so dust and stuff, and put them in your locker. Well, another prank they would do, you had to be careful, these guys, because if you left your locker for inspection, they'd reach down there and get your socks out that had those shoes in it, and then you got ready for inspection, and you didn't have your shoes. Your old regular shoes, you didn't shine them all the time, but boy, those inspection shoes were. But then just before inspection would come around, they'd finally give you your inspection shoes so you could get them on before inspection. But that was another typical prank they would pull.
Oh my. I guess we'll move on to after your service, or after the war, I guess. Do you recall the day that you were discharged?
Yes. We were in dry dock. See, after my third cruise, and we come back to the States, and after my third cruise, which was really uneventful, and there's nothing going over in the Far East at that time. I lost my train of thought. And oh yeah, so we were in San Diego, and the ship went up to San Francisco for dry dock. It was going to be a complete overhaul. It had been an attack carrier, and they was going to make it a submarine. I think it was going to change it from a CVA, which is carrier vessel attack, to a CVS, which was carrier vessel anti-submarine. And all they do is they carry these little helicopters aboard, and they go down and drop these things down there to see if one of these atomic submarines that Russia had at the time was around the waters or anything. And so at the time of my discharge, I was in San Francisco, and that was on it was Friday the 13th that I got out of service, released. Because my regular discharge date was on Saturday, April 14th, and they didn't release from the ship because everyone went on liberty on the weekends. So my official date was April the 13th. Well, I had been promoted quartermaster second class, and my division officer, his name was J.P. Curlis, was talked to me for a week trying to get me to re-enlist because I was going to be a second class, and he was telling me how valuable I was to the Navy, and another year I could be a first class and then be a chief and all that. And I told him, JP, there's nothing in this world to keep me from going back to civilian life. But anyway, they had a tradition now when you got out that the next person out to get discharged would carry what they called a sea bag, and that's what you put your clothes in. A duffel bag, as the Army calls them, duffel bag Marine. We call them sea bags. And you pack all your belongings in your sea bag, and you lock it up. And the next person to get out was to carry your sea bag off the ship for you. Well, I went up to requirement. I got my sea bag packed, and I remember very well. The guy I mentioned, Cole from South Carolina, he was the next person to get discharged. And so I said, there was a kid from California, his name was Bill Bonnet, and I asked Bill, I said, Bill, where's Cole? He's got to carry my sea bag off. And he looked at me and he said, Ray, he said, CJ, we call him CJ, Charles Jerry was his name, and he said, CJ just could not, he just could not see you to leave the Navy, and he said he just couldn't carry your sea bag off for you, so he wanted to know if I would carry it off. And so I said, well, you tell Cole that I really appreciate his thoughts, because it was, we had been so close for 4 years, and he went to come on right after I did in division, the quartermasters, and we'd stayed together for 4 years. And so that was, the next day on Saturday morning, my wife and I, and my brother, who was stationed in, my brother Jim Martin, who was stationed in Parks Air Force Base, had 30-day leave coming. So my wife and I and Jim, we got my car, we drove back to Indiana. On Saturday morning we left over at Alameda. That's where I was stationed at the time. Dry docks was over in San Francisco, and you had to go across the Bay Bridge to get over into Alameda. It was Oakland, and Oakland went underneath the tunnel you was in Alameda. And that was the Naval Air Station there. And we lived in Quonset Hut, had a 2-bedroom place, but it was nice. And that's where we left from. And I remember the time that my dad had sent me the Indiana license plate to put on my car out there, because I had California plates on it. And I have a picture at home showing my brother took, I'm changing my license plates, putting Indiana on there, and he was pointing at it. Their eyes pointing at him after I got done. So it felt good to go back to Indiana again after 4 years.
Mm-hmm. When you returned, did you go back to work or did you go to school?
When I come home, before I went in, I graduated from high school in 1950. Then I had 2 years of Chicago Technical College School of Drafting. And when I come back, I was going to go to Purdue University to finish my education. And so I was ready to enlist in August, and you might know I found out my wife got pregnant. I couldn't get her pregnant in California, but as soon as we got to Indiana, where she got pregnant, this Indiana air, that's what I always told her, she got pregnant. Mm-hmm. And we found out that she was pregnant. And by the way, my wife had polio in 1953, right after I come back from Korea. She was one of the last cases of polio. And she wasn't released to work yet, so her being pregnant, and I decided that it might have been a little rough going to college, her not being able to help me out and only getting $110 a month because that's what they paid. But I was ready to get enrolled. I had cleared all my GI Bill had been cleared by the service officer now. And I happened to talk to one of my friends in high school, and his dad was personnel manager at Honeywell here in Wabash. And he said, Ray, we're looking for people for our engineering department. You got drafting experience from 2 years college. He said, go down and talk to my dad. And he said, see if you'll hire. So I went down and talked to the personnel manager. And in August the 19th of 1956, I started working for Honeywell here in Wabash in the engineering department as a draftsman.
Okay. How large of a family did you have with your wife?
I had a girl that was born in 57, Diana. I have a son that was born in 58, that's Gary. And then I have another daughter that was born in 63, her name's Linda.
Okay. Did you receive any support from the GI Bill?
Yes, I bought my home through the GI Bill. I got the guaranteed loan by the government and got low interest rates. And compared to today's prices, maybe I shouldn't tell you this, but my monthly payments at that time was $103 a month. So you can see it was quite a difference.
You said you had some close relationships while in the service.
Uh-huh.
Were you able to continue those after?
Yes. I went to, we had a kid named Bob Ruffner who was from Florida, Indiana. It was in my division. Bob would come up, he married a girl from Tennessee, and he made a couple visits up to Wabash to visit me. And then there was Red Mathis, we called him Red, because he had red hair. Red Mathis was from Crestview, Florida, and my family and I would make trips down to Florida to visit with the Mathis family. And then his good buddy, the kid that said he wanted to tie his rope to me, his name was Hodges, he ended up marrying a sister that Red's wife was. So they both settled in Florida, and he lived in Dustin, Florida, and I got to go down and see him and his family, the Hodges family, the Mathis family. I visited Neosho, Missouri, where Grannon was from. Took the family there. He took us down to the Ozarks and places like that and showed us hanging out around there. Grannon then made a trip. He had a relative that worked over at Kokomo at, I think it was Kmart, and he come and stayed at my place for a few days while his wife's relation stayed over there with her family. And I got to show him Wabash and all the highlights of Wabash, big deal. And then Cole, I went down to visit Cole with my family. We hung out together. I made 2 or 3 trips to see Cole and 2 or 3 trips to see Mathis. And then there was, I might say that Mathis, Hodges passed away about 10 years ago. Mathis and I talk maybe 3 or 4 times a year to this day. We're still in communications with one another. Jerry Cole, I've lost track of him since my wife and I went to. I belong to a Phil C. We got a Phil C. Reunion, and anyway, I served aboard the Phil C. Has these reunions. They have them down in Florida and stuff. My wife and I went to Phil C. reunion. We went down. It was at Savannah, no, Charleston. And so we went into South Carolina where Cole was from. And I tried to find Cole and I couldn't. I called a couple Jerry Coles and it wasn't the one and I lost track of him. Last I knew he was going to the University of South Carolina. He'd worked in the cotton mill and they kind of went downhill there and he's going to go to college to finish his education and I don't know. And then Grandin worked in the post office and I lost track of him. So I've lost track of Grandin and Cole. My wife and I went to Bronson, Missouri a few years ago, and I went on over to Neosho, Missouri. Just it wasn't that far, and spent the night. Looked up the Grandins, and he worked for the post office, and I went to the post office, and of course it'd been so long that no one knew what happened to him. Mm. So, but yeah, I kept track of my close buddies for quite a few years, and especially one in Warsaw, Indiana, named Joseph Cook, and we were so close together. We kept in contact with each other for a long time.
Okay. Did you join any veterans organizations after?
Yes, I joined them. I was in the Veterans of Foreign Wars before I got out of the Navy. They had what they call a Jackrabbit and membership thing. So I joined that, and then I come home. I joined the Post-15 American Legion, and American Legion. I got real active in the American Legion. I got into the working in my way through the various offices, and in 1964, 65, I was elected commander of the Post-15 here in Wabash, and then I also held various 5th District. The American Legion congressional districts are the same as the congressional districts are. Wabash was in the 5th District, Legion in Wabash was in the 5th Legion District. And I held various offices in the 5th District Legion. I quit being active because of my age and health and stuff like that about 15 years ago. But yeah, that's the 2 organizations I joined when I got out of the service.
Okay. Did you think that your experience in the military influenced the way that you feel about war and the way that you feel about the military in general?
Yes, I do. I know a lot of people complain today about what's going on overseas in Iraq. I feel, my own personal feeling, I feel that it made me a better man. Go back to the original question, it made me a better man. It made me understand military life. It was to know what was expected of a young man going in. And I might say when you're 21, 22, you have no fear of anything. That's the reason these kids go in Iraq today. They have no fear of anything. I was the same way. Like I said, I didn't want to go out and shoot people. So that's one reason I went in the Navy. I wanted to serve my country, but I wanted to serve where I felt best I could serve it. And but I was never scared in the Navy. I was never seasick in the Navy. People say, well, I get seasick, but that's all in your head. That's what they told us in boot camp. So like I said, it's the Navy way, you believe them. And the first time I went out to sea, I got a little dizzy. I said, no, I'm not seasick, and it worked. I kept saying I'm not seasick. But anyway, yeah, it made you feel about war, and to a way I agree with what's going on in Iraq, but my personal feeling is I really think it's about time we should leave. Our duties, our job has been done over there. But it helped me be a better person and understand the military and know what's going on. And I might say if I was 21 again or 20 or 19, I'd do the same thing all over again. I would not turn my back.
You kind of already answered this question, but is there anything else you'd like to say about how being in the service affected your life after?
Made me a better person. That made me come home. Taught me responsibility. From various jobs I had to do in the Navy, I got to be a section leader. I was responsible for the 16 guys in my not 16, the 8 men in my section, 9 men in my section, 8 men. I was 9 counting the South. I was responsible for those 8 men. You had to stay friendly with them. Like when they was overseas, I put my name on the watch list. I told those guys, well, as long as I'm overseas, I'll stand to watch for you. You go ashore and have liberty. When we get back to the States, my wife's there. I want to spend every night with my wife. I'll make out the watch list of 8 people, and they agreed to that. So it taught me responsibility. It taught me how to get along with people, which helped me in my job later on in life for Honeywell. And Marcon would become later. Honeywell become Marcon. But it taught me that if you treat people right, people's going to treat you right.
Fair enough. Right. Is there anything else that you would like to say, or any more stories you'd like to add to this?
Well, let's see. The only thing I can think of is that I wish all my cruises had been like my last cruise from in 1954 to 9 months. One thing I liked about the Navy, when you went overseas, we were gone for 7 to 8 months, and we were back to the States. Then we were getting ready to go back over and coming back. So there was a lot of travel. But the stories that I had over there, the thoughts and memories I had over there, it's been over 50 years ago, and it's lasted me a lifetime. If something should happen to me today, I would have had a good life. I won't regret it, and everything made me a better man, a better person. I enjoyed my children. I enjoyed my grandchildren. And as far as the other stories goes, I think we covered just about everything that I had. But like I started to say, that my last cruise was the most joyous cruise because there was no war over there. It was just like I was getting on an ocean liner and going overseas and visiting. I wasn't in Yokosuka, Japan nearly much. Yokosuka, Japan is more or less our home port at the naval station there when we went overseas. But the one cruise, all we did was go to the Manila, the Philippines, Okinawa, Formosa, places like that. Now, I got to Formosa, but I never left the ship because, like I said, I was where I was. You guys go aboard, I'll stay aboard. And then we get back to the States. I really didn't have anything to see in Formosa, but I was there. The ship was there, and that cruise was just a wonderful cruise. I know it was the end of my 4 years. It was my last time overseas. I said goodbye I had a lot of friends in Japan. I made in 4 years. And one was an old kamikaze pilot, and he was glad the war ended when it did because we call him George, because our division kind of hung out in a hotel there. It was called the Sai Hotel. And George was the runner of this hotel. And he showed me pictures. And he was, if the war hadn't ended when it did, his squadron was the next one to go up. And kamikaze pilots were suicide pilots. They weren't coming back. You were selling their planes. And he showed me pictures of that. And I said goodbye to him. I said goodbye to the other people I knew over there and made friends with. The storekeepers and things like that, and it was kind of hard saying goodbye to them, knowing that you'd never see them again in your life. That was it. And so that was. I didn't have many friends in Hawaii because really, when we went to Hawaii, it was either out doing operational readiness inspection. But I enjoyed the liberty in Hawaii. Went to Waikiki Beach. And on the beachcombers and places like that. And I had fun in Hawaii. But I guess that the main thing about the service was leaving your friends that you made, even though you're overseas, that you never see again. And then leaving a lot of your buddies that you would never see again. There was a lot of kids in my division. I could start naming the names today because they were close to me. Brown, Renfro, and Bluntack, and all those guys. They were from all Iowa, California, Arizona, Texas. You never saw them again. That was one reason that my camp here, I belong to the USS Philippine Sea Association. And when we do go to reunions, I do see some friends I served with. We weren't close, but I was on ship with them. And one of my first jobs when I went in navigation, we had to take care of all the clocks. They were 7-day clocks. They were wind clocks because you couldn't have an electric, in case electricity went, you still had to have a clock. And we had 94 clocks on that ship from the bridge all the way down to the bottom of the ship. And my job was like a paper route. I had to wind those clocks, and you got your time from Greenwich Mean Time. You had to set it. You had 3 chronometers. You always looked at those chronometers. You used the one that was closest to the time. You had a stopwatch. You had to set everything, and then go around and start getting the clock so that every clock read the same on the ship. All 94 clocks had the same. And they had a little button on the back, and you had to do that and watch your stop clock and then release that button when it come through. But that was one of the first jobs I had, and that was a big responsibility to do that. And that's where I met a lot of friends. This one guy, I went to one of my conventions. His name was Brown, and we got talking, and I hadn't been down there for years. And we were sitting at this table, and he kept looking at me, and he says, "I think I know you." He says, "Your face is familiar." And I says, "It is." And he says, "I want to ask you something. Did you just take care of the clocks on the Phil Sea?" And I says, "Yeah." He says, "Wasn't that about 1950, 52, 53?" And I says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I was one of those guys down at the bottom of the ship. You used to come down." And he said, "You talked to me a couple of times when you come down." I didn't remember it, but he remembered it. And he said, "I remember you coming down setting those clocks." And I said, "My God," I said, "Sure is a small world." He belonged to the Phil Sea Association. I belong to the Phil Sea Association. So that's one reason I'm glad I joined the Phil Sea Association, just because of friendships like that.
Yeah. Very cool. Alrighty. Well, thank you very much for sharing.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I was so glad I brought some of my cruise books. Cruise books were just like a high school yearbook. But I do have some pictures here of Korea, and think that the Navy pilots didn't have too much to. This is just some of the action that went on. Here's a plane come back all. Well, this guy took a blast from the shore battery, and here we got guys going into the drinks. Now, like I said, when you're a quartermaster on the watch, if you have the watch, that pilot that went in there, you had to get the plane number of the pilot, his name. That was all the quartermaster's responsibility up on the bridge. And that all had to be entered into the logbook. And I had one time I was on watch, and a guy shot himself. He got a deer jump from a girl, and he shot himself aboard ship. Mm. And I had to run down there and get the information on that and put in the ship's log. Because, like I said, it was basically a history. But that's what we saw. A lot here was a plane that landed, and the nose of it, after it hit the gear, the nose of it come flying off. It was very dangerous down onto the flight deck. And I remember one kid who got killed with a plane. The propeller stopped. He went to put the wheel blocks underneath it, and for some reason the propeller jumped back, and he was walking in between it, and the propeller jumped back, and it cut him across the neck and killed him. Oh, wow. But yeah, that's what we had.